Welcome to another edition of One on One. I'm your host, Tyler Small, and today we are joined by yet another notable alum from the Salle University. She is a sports reporter for Fox and ESPN. It's Renee Washington. Renee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's all ours. So let's dive right into it. Before we get into how the current pandemic has affected your day-to-day, why don't you give us a brief backstory of what you were doing back in February before this all happened?
Gosh, life pre-COVID. It's like life BC and everything now, or like it was insane. It was a different time. Honestly, as we were preparing for the spring, was getting ready for my spring games. So I actually was working with LaSalle men's basketball program as an in-arena host this past winter. So in February, I was just finishing up as the final home games were finishing up. I was finishing up my time working to host games. I was also preparing for the NBA and WNBA season, where I cover the Mystics and the Wizards. And then with ESPN, I cover college athletics through the Ivy League network. So I was also getting ready for that schedule as well. I do some, each season, I do different sports, sideline reporting, color commentating, just a variety of different roles. So I was fully preparing for what was going to be a great spring, honestly. I had my schedule all set out. I was ready to go, and then COVID hit and shut it all down. But, looking back on where I was then compared to where I am now and what's changed and what's been going on, it actually has been an incredible, weird time. And I always tell people, I'm not going to openly say that COVID's been great for everyone. I know a lot of people who have unfortunately passed away or been impacted in some way. So I'm not going to act like it's all sunshine and roses and rainbows. It's been awful. But I will say that through all this storm that we are in of COVID, my career has actually taken a big leap and grown tremendously through this time. So where I was before, I thought I was doing all these incredible things, and I had this great spring schedule set up of games I was going to be covering and going down to cover the Mystics off of their championship last year in the WNBA. And I was just starting with the Wizards, and then it all got shut down, but it actually since then has picked up in a much better way. So
that's great. I mean, yeah, I agree. It's kind of tough with such a terrible thing, such a terrible pandemic, to see the light in all of it, but it's really great to hear that you've been able to flourish throughout it. So talk a little bit about what it's kind of been like, kind of rolling with the punches. As from your explanation, it seems that your whole career has kind of been like that, where you're willing to do color commentary one day, but then you're on the field the next, stuff like that. How have you seen whether there the similarities or differences when you do the ESPN kind of with the Ivy League, see how colleges handle it as opposed to the two basketball leagues that went down to Florida for the bubble life? So talk about what that whole experience has been like.
Well, what I enjoy about it is every live production and every team, every league is completely different. So it just gives me a lot of great perspective. I actually just started, one of the benefits of what came out of COVID was I just started working with the MLS, with the Philadelphia Union, doing broadcasts for their games. So a live game with them as a pregame, postgame, halftime host, compared to a sideline reporting role with ESPN, compared to writing articles and hosting shows with the Mystics and Wizards, it's all completely different. So, I think that's something I always try to really stress to anyone that's in the industry, is to just learn as much as you can, because everybody does things a little bit differently. Every production and every game and every broadcast is kind of run a little bit differently. So it's very beneficial to have that opportunity to learn, but then also just to be able to do so many different roles forces you to have to think differently. So I have to prepare a little bit differently for sideline reporting versus a pregame show, and definitely for color commentating. So it just honestly, for me, keeps me on my toes, and it allows everything to stay unique and stay fresh, in the sense where I don't ever feel like I'm doing the same thing every day. And I know I always get the question, what's a typical day like? And I'm like, I don't know. It's 24 hours. It's a lot of minutes, but whatever happens within those 24 hours is completely different. I can tell you I eat every day. I sleep every day. But that's about it. Everything else is completely different. So even in having things scheduled, something may drastically change. You may be planning, I know even a couple weeks ago, I was not supposed to do a game, and then it just changed, and all of a sudden they needed me to step in and and help out. And I was, bam, I'm on the show. Now I have to prepare for being on TV. I have to prepare for hosting the show. So it's always different. And you just never know really when your name's going to be called, when an opportunity is going to open up, or even just when things will just out and out change. So I think the rigorous schedule of it is what I really enjoy the most, because for me as a former athlete, and I weirdly and ironically, it's now weirding me out that I'm wearing a LaSalle soccer sweatshirt, but it's perfect. It fits in line perfectly. But what I went through and learned as an athlete is exactly what I deal with a lot as a professional as well. So it's the same types of mindset approach, the same types of chaos at times, organized chaos, as I like to say, of just trying to figure everything out and keep moving, And so I really enjoy being able to have so much diversity in the work that I do. And eventually we'll be doing just one job. But for now, I'm enjoying working and wearing so many different hats.
Yeah. I mean, you get to really dip your toe into everything almost and kind of get an idea of what everything is like. I like what you mentioned, that you kind of credit this willingness to do whatever you need to do from your background in sports through LaSalle. Was there anything else from LaSalle that really helped you come into where you are today, or something that you still hold from your time at LaSalle that you see now in the professional world?
A lot, actually. So I was a public relations concentration as a comm major, and my minors were in Spanish and psychology. I had a number of internships. So one of the things I always tell people is, during my time at LaSalle, I was a 2-sport athlete. I actually also ran track, and I had like 7 or 8 internships. So it really, at that time, which I still don't know how or why, but looking back, really allowed me to learn just how much I can handle, like being able to be a 2-sport athlete and having success with soccer as a player and for our team as a whole, and then also juggling so many different things. My academics were good. I graduated high in my class. That's something that was encouraging. And it really gave me the confidence to know that if I can do all this, the sky's the limit. You really, sometimes the best tests in life and the most challenging things really help us to learn the most about ourselves. And that's even COVID. Like, that's been what's been the driving force behind COVID for me. It's really when you're most uncomfortable and when things aren't going as smoothly as you'd like, or when you do have to juggle a lot of things, or when things are hectic, that you realize a lot about yourself. So honestly, like every aspect of my time at LaSalle, and I'll even go back to the fact that playing in the Atlantic 10 in a program that when I first came in was kind of middle of the conference, to then being a top team in the conference and also on a national spotlight, also showed me a lot about the fact that you can really make a name for yourself. It doesn't have to always be the same path that someone else takes. You don't have to be, in this case, I at a small school in LaSalle, but in my career, I'm now at ESPN and Fox Sports. I didn't start there. And I'm not Fox Sports with Skip and Shannon or ESPN up in Bristol, Connecticut by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm still not even fully where I want to be, but understanding the value of your experiences and how it can teach you. And it's about the quality of your experiences, not just the quantity of them. So I know I work a million jobs, which is ironic to even say that, but making sure that you are working in ways that make sense for you. And it was the same thing as my time as an athlete. You want to make sure whatever you're doing, it always aligns with what your purpose is, what your journey is, what direction you're trying to move. So understanding where you are now and where you're trying to go, as well as where you came from, so that you can have a great understanding of if everything is moving in the right direction. Because there are going to be those times where it's like, am I doing the right thing? Am I supposed to be doing this? Why am I doing? You have those moments of doubt and second guessing yourself. But that's when it really just allows you to, when you have perspective of, okay, I'm only 4 years in. I finished grad school in 2016, and that's when I fully got started as a broadcaster. So I'm comparing myself to someone else that might be my age. Maybe I'm behind, but comparing myself to where I was 4 years ago, I'm way farther than I would have ever expected. So I think so much of what I experienced at LaSalle does align really well with just life in general. It really allowed me to learn a lot about myself and just about the way that processes and things pay out over time.
It's great. It's great. So gearing this back more towards your professional life, we've seen a lot of changes that have come with people adjusting from the coronavirus. Whenever I ask this question to everyone else, I got the same question from Meredith Morakovitz, who also works on television, and Mike Sealski, who works just in print.
Oh, I love Mike.
And yeah, he's the best. But they all said the number one thing that's changed, that I think is going to stay somewhat similar for a while down the road, is the way interviews are held. So do you agree with that? Do you see anything else that you think is really going to be different throughout? What are your take on it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, honestly, even the fact that you have seen so many more people. I mean, look at us right now. We're having a conversation over Zoom. You look at so many more shows and major networks right now working through different platforms like, FaceTime, Skype. I was called in to do an appearance for a Toronto news station over Skype. And they had found, they follow my work, and I actually joined their live news show around a couple of different topics, actually, around social injustice, and it all became through Skype. Like, we were having the conversation across countries over Skype. It's just incredible. You don't have to fly out, even for the fact that there's a limited amount of reporters that are able to cover sports. It's also changing the way that we're doing things. I just did a broadcast for the Union, and they always do them remotely for away games, but we're remote for away games. We're not traveling to the venues or anything. And that's only going to change more and more, in my opinion, over the next year because of COVID. And it's forcing and forcing in a good way for some reasons, but forcing us to change that. You're seeing more IGTVs and Facebook Lives and Instagram Lives and Zoom interviews and stuff like that. So I know, like, even I went out, I bought a green screen. I don't have anything hooked up right now. Don't get me wrong. But I set up my own at home studio because of the fact that, I kept noticing I was getting called in for major interviews and different opportunities virtually. I actually had someone that's in the process of putting together a show that is virtual, where everyone is all over the country. So I think this is also, in this time, because of the way that we've had to move, force people to realize that you can actually host a show, or you can actually hold an interview, and you don't have to be in the same country. It's okay, let alone the same studio. So I think it's actually for a good reason, because it just expands your reach. So now you can have conversations with more people. You can get to interview other people rather than just being restricted to those that are within a drive. So I think it's for a good reason, but I also think it's just the fact that the industry itself is shifting. I always also tell people, like, social media, digital platforms, it's really allowing the way that we absorb our sports news and all news to change. So it's also changing the jobs that are available and the opportunities that are available as well. So yeah, I definitely see the shift, and I think it's going to be here to stay, actually, for a while.
Right. So you just mentioned that the Union they always go remote for away games. And I'd say for some of the other sports, it makes me sad to say it, but in the Yankees, for example, when John Sterling and Susan Waldman for the radio, they're not as technologically inclined as maybe the two of us are. And they were doing, for the first season, all this stuff from virtual remote. And you could tell there was obviously some difficulties. So did you see some of the leagues, or maybe even some people in the industry, contacting, whether it was the MLS or other sports that have experience working remote like this?
Yeah, I think that's where an opportunity actually opens up, because if you're not as tech savvy and you have to now make this pivot to now do more shows remotely and virtually, that's where there have been some issues where you now have to call in someone that understands how to work, and set up a ring light, or set up, whatever it may be. I know some people that, don't understand how to set up, and you don't even have to have a camera. You can use a laptop, you can use a phone, whatever. So I do think that is something we've been seeing, along with the leagues have also been contacting each other on ways to return safely, ways to work around COVID, ways to get fans back in seats, but also, as you mentioned, with the broadcast, because I think we're going to continue to see a change in the broadcast from not usually in a typical game, there are a ton of media members and reporters and camera crew and so many different people on the sidelines and baseline. And I think that now we are going to continue to see that shift, because you can actually also have one person manning multiple cameras. You can have one person that's doing multiple jobs. So not only are we going to see a shift in getting more young or experienced, I should say, people to help with remote broadcast. But I think it's just also going to change the need for how many people are actually covering games, So that's something I was just having a conversation around, with having the way cameras are set up now. I can literally be sitting here controlling 4 different cameras, and now you don't need 4 cameramen, which cuts down on some numbers. So yeah, I think we're seeing a definite shift, and COVID is actually, in my opinion, accelerating it more than anything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So want to thank you again for the time. I'll just ask you one more question. Usually I try and end on a LaSalle based question, but you had such a great speech before. I have to ask you something again. If you were to talk to yourself, like you said, 4 years ago, and you were in the spot that possibly we are now, people wanting to be like you in the field, but not knowing what the future holds in the sports media field because of this pandemic, do you have any tips of advice that you would like to give to us?
Oh, where do I begin? So 4 years ago to now, it's just incredible when you think back. It almost like makes you want to cry, as cheesy as that is, because I just think about where I was then as a confused student trying to figure out what's next, trying to figure out how to really get my career going, to now. And then definitely once COVID hit, it just changed everything. I jokingly say this, but I kid you not, Tyler, in that literally everything in my life changes except for like my name. like everything in my life is completely different now. I moved, like my family's the same, but every aspect of my life in some way has been impacted, changed. Not all good, but overall, I would say for a good reason. So I think the biggest thing, going back to myself 4 years ago, and what I would say is just, you're stronger than be more patient. Because I think a lot of times we just rush things, which is ironic because I'm still in this process now. So I should probably be telling my current self this too. But be more patient because, it may not happen overnight. I think we often get stuck on the idea of being an overnight success. But Messi has a great quote in that it took him years to become an overnight success. So be patient and rely on that strength, because no matter what is thrown your way, as long as you're consistently doing the right things, consistently have the right mindset, the right approach, you think bigger picture, it's a marathon. It's really not a sprint. It will work out. And, when I was first getting started and just applying to a million jobs because I didn't know how to get my foot in the door, to now, it's remarkable. But it's because I've been consistently surrounded by the right people, doing the right things, trying to just constantly keep focusing on building my craft. There's this great quote I saw, which is like, focus less on announcing what you're doing and focus more on just what you're actually doing. So like less time on actually like, oh, look at me, this is all the great stuff I have going on, and just focus on what you're actually doing. When you're grinding and hustling and working constantly and consistently, it will, over time, you'll see the growth. So now when I look back, even a week ago, a month ago, I didn't have some of these jobs that I wasn't working with the union until September. That just started. So it's like things happen so quickly, but in a slow way. And you just have to be patient and just understand that your strength will get you through as long as you are consistently thinking, doing, and surrounding yourself with the right people and the right mindset. So I guess that's where I would go with it.
Renee, I asked you a pretty tough question, and I was hoping for a good answer. That was even better than I could have asked for. That's a perfect. Thank you so much for the time and sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tyler, so much for having me on. It's a pleasure, and it's always great to be able to help give back. I think I was on LaSalle TV when I was a player way back when, so it's great to see that you guys are still doing some incredible work and still telling some great, stories and interviews, having people like Mike on, and that's awesome. So best of luck to you as well, and all the best to you.
Thanks so much. So that does it for this week's edition of One on One. We'll see you next time.